While this seems like an environmentalist nightmare, let's talk about the facts. Hydraulic fracturing is subject to both federal and state regulations, and there have been no instances of fracking causing contamination of drinking water. Fracking fluid, made primarily of sand and water, uses a small percentage of chemicals that have common household applications and are regulated by the state. Companies dispose of and recycle wastewater using many different methods, all of which are compliant with existing federal and state laws. The fracking process itself does not cause earthquakes. In rare instances, the use of underground injection wells for storage has caused earthquakes. Induced seismic activity from many underground energy activities is not a new phenomenon and has been closely monitored by the Department of Energy. Methane, the gas that caused the tap water to ignite, was documented to have been in the water before fracking or drilling was established in the area. If the United States hopes to realize its best possible energy and economic future, then we must pursue policies that operate from a foundation of reality, not from a baseline of willfully misleading talking points from activist NGOs. The energy industry, accounting for 8% of our entire national GDP and 10 million jobs, is far too important to our economy and to our future as a global hegemon to be subject to tax policy that shoots from the hip in hopes of scoring a few cheap election year political points. All of the oil and gas producing states have an impressive and long track record of regulating hydraulic fracturing, yet the federal government is proposing burdensome and duplicative regulations. Congress should recognize the state's effectiveness in regulating fracking and prevent federal attempts that would unreasonably slow down the success of oil and gas development. Legislation headed by Senator Ted Cruz and other members of Congress have been proposed to propel the U.S. into the energy renaissance. In the coming days, the government should take steps to expand energy exploration, stop harmful regulations, and eliminate barriers to trade and infrastructure development so as to allow the creation of private sector jobs and economic growth. The American energy renaissance cannot thrive if the federal government disrupts this effective framework and impedes the job and economic growth hydraulic fracturing is already providing. Government should expand energy development by providing states the option of leasing, permitting, and regulating energy resources, such as oil, gas, wind, and solar, on federal lands. According to the U.S. State Department, constructing the Keystone XL pipeline could result in 42,000 jobs. Keystone has undergone 5 environmental reviews since its initial application in 2008, and none have found a significant negative impact on the environment. The government needs to immediately approve and allow the private sector to build the Keystone pipeline. Expanding the offshore areas of the outer continental shelf available for significant oil and gas development will allow accessibility for natural resources. Lastly, the crude oil export ban needs to be lifted. Last year, U.S. crude oil production increased 15%, but many American refineries cannot handle the additional crude for technical and capacity reasons. The United States is missing out on export opportunities that could produce good-paying private sector jobs in the United States. If President Obama wants to develop America's vast energy resources, grow the U.S. economy, restore coherence to U.S. trade and energy policy, and avoid trade conflicts, he should order DOE to immediately approve all, not just some, of the pending license applications for natural gas and crude oil. He then should pursue, with Congress, an overhaul of our archaic licensing system so that they reflect the new American energy landscape and the United States' position as a global export power. Such reforms would bolster investment, production, and employment in the oil and gas sector, stabilize the U.S. energy market, and benefit the overall economy, avoid the myriad of policy legal problems raised by the current system, and produce a rare moment of bipartisan collaboration in Washington. The growing dependence of the U.S. and the global economy on oil can have dire consequences for the economic well-being of the United States, our national security, and the American way of life. For the near term, let us focus on the principal avenues for securing our oil supply, which include deterring anti-status quo players such as Iran, Venezuela, and the global radical Islamist movement with its terrorist organizations, cooperating with local governments to enhance the protection of critical shipping choke points such as the Suez Canal, the Bosporus, Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, etc., and developing contingency plans for seaborne terrorism or piracy aimed at tanker ships. Boosting an international coalition of oil consumers by bringing aboard India, China, and other major emerging markets such as Brazil and Turkey. and securing open access and a level playing field for international oil companies and national oil companies. Specifically, consumer countries should make as their top foreign policy priority openness of investment regimes, stable, predictable, and transparent energy regulatory systems based on the rule of law in producing countries, and fighting corruption. Increased U.S. oil production has the potential to provide real national security benefits, but the nation's energy security will continue to be heavily affected by events around the globe. The following interview with Admiral Dennis Blair, former Director of National Intelligence and Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Pacific Command, and General Michael W. Hagee, 33rd Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, reiterate these recommendations.
So, we have an energy boom in this country. Some projections show that North America could be energy independent by 2020, and already most of the oil in the Middle East goes to Asia. So, is there really a reason for the U.S. to keep such a large military presence, involved to regions like the Middle East?
The first thing, Steve, is that there are tremendous advantages to the energy boom: jobs, greater industrial competitiveness, better security of where a lot of our oil comes from. But in this report that General Hagee and I just published today, we show that the national security effects are not quite as simple as some people think. Because oil is a global market, because the price is set by overall world supply and demand, because the United States transportation sector is over 90% dependent on oil, that means that what happens in the Middle East as a producer, what happens in China as a producer, affects the American economy. And so we have to remain engaged in the world, not only for oil purposes, but of course for many other purposes.
Do you think we'll have to be just as engaged as we are now?
I believe that we should be engaged. Maybe there are several elements of national power. There's a military element, political element, economic element. Maybe the balance of those elements should change, and that's what we argue in the report here, that the diplomacy, the diplomatic power that we have should be helping to establish policy, and militaries there supporting, but not leading with the military, leading with our diplomatic power. I would like to go back to your first question just a moment. You talked about energy independence. Denny addressed the second part of your question. Really, the first part is I'm from Texas, and there are people down there who believe that because of the Eagle Ford Shale area that we will be energy independent. What the facts tend to show is that is in fact not true. At least out to the next 15, 20 years, we are going to still be dependent on some foreign oil. And as Admiral Blair said, it is in fact a global market. So we do in fact need to be engaged.
Right.
I think that's one.
While the economic benefits of the oil boom have received top billing, the national security implications are equally, if not more, important. Additional oil supplies from the United States can help make the market more stable and robust, provide renewed flexibility in dealing with foreign policy challenges, and increase the physical security of America's overall oil supplies. However, these benefits are not guaranteed, and the national security challenges posed by America's dependence on oil are as real as ever. The bottom line is that as long as oil remains the lifeblood of the U.S. economy, the country remains at risk to high and volatile oil prices and instability in critical oil-producing regions like the Middle East. Further, existing vital interests in those regions, including fighting terrorism, preventing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and supporting the security of Israel and other friendly countries, will also remain. In other words, the concept of energy independence through domestic supply is false. The United States will only experience the full benefits of the domestic oil boom by working to help improve stability in the global oil market and decrease the nation's exposure to it. Our political leaders should prioritize long-term political stability in major oil-producing regions, enhance the international community's capability to respond to oil supply crises that will inevitably occur, and diversify energy sources in the transportation sector away from oil to electricity and natural gas. Energy independence, defined as competitive local production of all the energy we need, remains a mirage. It is energy security that we need to accomplish, in which abundant and affordable energy supply is within reach of all Americans. Recognizing the inherent, systematic, and long-term instability of the global oil markets is the first step in addressing the problem the U.S. is facing.